I was struck by what a bright and a beautiful girl she was. I know that the whole office is listening, so I'll make it short. Would you have lunch with me, maybe at Otay, the racetrack?
There are moments in a man's life, quiet, unguarded moments, when the truth finally rises above the legend. For Gregory Peck, those truths were never spoken loudly, only remembered. Behind the dignity, behind the roles that made him unforgettable, there were women who shaped him in ways the world never fully saw. Some stood beside him, some challenged him, and some were never meant to stay. But here is what makes his story different. Not all of them were loves, and one of them he never dared to hold on to. And in the final years of his life, what he remembered most was not fame, but the women who quietly defined the man he became. Before fame, she stood beside him, Greta Kukkonen. Before the world knew his name, before the cameras and the carefully written roles, there was a quieter version of Gregory Peck, a man still finding his place, still learning what it meant to carry responsibility. And standing beside him during those uncertain years was Greta Kukkonen. She was not part of Hollywood's glitter. She didn't arrive with ambition or demand attention. Instead, she brought something far less visible, but far more important: stability. In a time when Peck was building his career from the ground up, navigating rejection and uncertainty, Greta offered a kind of grounded support that cannot be measured in headlines. Their marriage began in 1942, long before Peck became a symbol of integrity on screen. Back then, life was simpler, but also more fragile. There were financial struggles, long working hours, and the quiet pressure of trying to succeed in a world that rarely gives second chances. Greta stood through all of it, not as a spectator, but as a partner. And yet, as his career began to rise, something shifted. Fame has a way of changing the rhythm of a life. The demands grow louder, the distance grows wider. What once felt steady begins to strain under expectations neither person fully understands. Their marriage eventually ended. But what makes this chapter meaningful is not the ending. It's the absence of bitterness that followed. Peck never spoke of Greta with regret or dismissal. Instead, there was a quiet respect, an acknowledgement of what she had been in his life. Because some people are not meant to stay forever, but they are meant to be there, at the beginning. The actress who challenged his soul, Ingrid Bergman. By the time Gregory Peck met Ingrid Bergman, he had already built a reputation. Calm, controlled, dependable. Directors trusted him. Audiences believed him. He knew exactly who he was on screen. And then came Spellbound. From the first scenes they shared, something felt off balance. Not wrong, but unfamiliar. Bergman didn't approach a moment the way others did. She didn't wait for cues. She didn't lean on structure. She simply stepped into emotion, fully, instinctively, and expected the truth to follow. For Peck, that created a quiet tension, because control had always been his strength. But control, next to Bergman, began to feel like distance. There were moments, small, almost invisible, when he realized he wasn't matching her depth, that what he was giving was precise, but not yet vulnerable. And that realization didn't come comfortably. It unsettled him. Not because she demanded more, but because her presence exposed what was missing. And so, he adjusted. Not outwardly, not dramatically, but internally. He began to let moments breathe longer, to allow uncertainty into his performance, to trust feeling over perfection. It was a risk, and it changed him. He admired Bergman not just for her talent, but for what she quietly forced him to confront. That strength without vulnerability can become limitation. Because sometimes the most important people in your life are not the ones who support you, but the ones who make you realize you're not as complete as you thought you were. The gentle star he admired quietly, Audrey Hepburn. When Gregory Peck first met Audrey Hepburn, she was not yet a global icon. She was a young actress, relatively unknown, stepping into a role that would soon change her life forever. The film was Roman Holiday, and from the very beginning, Peck saw something others had not fully recognized yet. It wasn't just her beauty, though that was undeniable. It was something quieter, a kind of sincerity that couldn't be taught, a presence that didn't demand attention, yet gently held it. Peck made a decision early on, one that revealed more about his character than any performance ever could. He insisted that Hepburn receive equal billing in the film. At the time, it was an unusual move. He was the established star. She was not, but he understood something others would soon discover. She wasn't just part of the story. She was the story. And he respected that. What followed was not a romance, as many might expect. Instead, it became something far more enduring. A deep, genuine admiration built on kindness, humility, and mutual trust. Hepburn carried herself without ego. Even as fame found her, she never seemed to chase it. There was a gentleness in the way she spoke, the way she listened, the way she existed within the world. And Peck admired that, not loudly, not publicly, but in a way that lasted. Because in an industry often driven by ambition and noise, she remained something rare, quiet, authentic, untouched by the need to prove anything. And perhaps that is why he never tried to hold on to her in any personal sense. Some people are not meant to be possessed, they are meant to be respected, from a distance. The fearless woman he never forgot, Ava Gardner. By the time Gregory Peck met Ava Gardner, he had built a life on control. His performances were measured, his presence steady. Even his emotions seemed to arrive with permission. Gardner didn't believe in permission. When they worked together on the Beach, her energy disrupted something he had always relied on. She didn't follow rhythm, she created it. Lines shifted in tone. Reactions came earlier, sharper, more exposed than expected. And for the first time in a long while, Peck found himself slightly off balance. There was a moment, small, almost invisible, during a scene where he missed the emotional timing. Not because he didn't understand it, but because she had already moved past it. She was feeling ahead of him, and that unsettled him. Because control had always been his safeguard, but Gardner didn't offer safety. She offered truth, raw, immediate, and sometimes uncomfortable. Off camera, it was no different. She spoke directly, lived openly, made choices without the careful consideration Peck was known for. Around her, there was no space to remain guarded for long. You either met her honestly, or you stepped back. And for a moment, he didn't know which to do. That was the difference. With others, Peck was certain of himself. With Ava Gardner, he was aware of himself, and that awareness came with risk. He admired her not because she was easy to understand, but because she refused to be controlled, even by expectation. She lived fully, even when it came at a cost. Because some people don't just enter your life to be admired. They enter it to remind you that control is not the same as truth. The woman who matched his strength, Lauren Bacall. When Gregory Peck worked with Lauren Bacall on designing Woman, he expected professionalism. What he didn't expect was resistance. Bacall was not impressed by reputation. She didn't treat Peck like a legend. She treated him like an equal, and at times, like someone she was willing to challenge. Their dynamic carried a quiet friction. Not conflict in the dramatic sense, but a refusal to yield. In rehearsals, in dialogue, even in pauses between takes, there was an underlying push and pull. She questioned choices. She held her ground. She didn't adjust herself to make a scene easier. And that forced Peck into a different position. He wasn't guiding the rhythm. He was sharing it. At first, it disrupted his instinct for control. He was used to stability in his scenes, to knowing exactly where the emotional center would land. But with Bacall, that center shifted, unexpectedly, naturally, and instead of resisting it, he began to respect it. Because what she brought was not opposition. It was balance. She didn't need to be led. She didn't need to be protected within a scene. She stood beside him, fully present, fully aware, and completely unwilling to disappear into the background. That kind of presence can feel uncomfortable, unless you understand it. Peck did. And in time, he recognized something deeper. Admiration is not always about softness or harmony. Sometimes it's about standing next to someone who refuses to step back, and realizing that, for once, you don't have to lead. You just have to meet them there. The one who gave him peace, Veronique Passani. By the time Gregory Peck met Veronique Passani, life had already tested him. He had known early struggle, rising fame, admiration, and the quiet weight that comes with being seen as something more than human. He had experienced different kinds of connections, some intense, some distant, some unfinished. But with Veronique, something shifted. There was no performance left to give, no role to play, only the man himself. They met in Paris, far from the structured world of Hollywood, where expectations often shape behavior before truth has a chance to speak. Veronique was a journalist, observant, thoughtful, and grounded in reality. She did not approach Peck as a legend. She saw him as a person. And that made all the difference. Their relationship did not unfold with drama or unpredictability. It grew quietly, steadily, built on understanding rather than impression. She did not try to change him. She did not compete with his past. Instead, she offered something far more rare: consistency. In her presence, Peck found a kind of calm he had not experienced before. A life that was not driven by attention, but by meaning. She valued privacy, depth, and sincerity. The very things he had come to appreciate more with time. They remained together for decades, not because their life was perfect, but because it was real. And in the end, that is what mattered most to him. Because after everything, after the roles, the recognition, the admiration, what stayed was not the noise of a life lived in public, but the quiet of a life finally understood. Some people bring passion, some bring growth, but a very rare few bring peace, and that is the kind of love a man remembers when everything else begins to fade. In the end, Gregory Peck was remembered as a man of strength, dignity, and quiet integrity. But behind that image stood 6 women, each shaping him in ways the world never fully saw. Some were part of his past, some walked beside him for a lifetime, and some were only meant to be admired from a distance. Together, they reveal a deeper truth. Because a man is not only defined by what he achieves, but by who quietly shapes him along the way. And in the end, the world saw his strength. But only a few ever saw the women who gave it meaning. If one of these stories stayed with you, share your thoughts below. And subscribe for more timeless stories that still speak today.